Because the Article 5 process is a hybrid constitutional federal lawmaking process. So the vote is not really subject to the rules of the state legislature in making state laws. All you need is each house to affirmatively vote, thumbs up yes. That's it. Nothing more. The resolution memorializing that action is largely irrelevant. All it does is confirm the date. And in fact, the Supreme Court has ordered, starting in the 20s, that if it becomes an issue, Article 3 courts, federal courts, are directed to take judicial notice of when amendments were ratified by reference to the legislative journals of each state. Meaning, the day is when they vote, not the day when they get around to telling you that they voted. Okay? And many times they forget to vote. And people don't pay attention, and then things get lost in history. Now, let's start with Thomas Jefferson's chart. Thomas Jefferson was not authorized under the Constitution to promulgate anything, to declare anything, so he didn't. He never did. And I think I've made that pretty clear now, that that's a myth, and it's not the truth. And by the way, the Attorney General's office agrees with me. Congress agrees with me. In fact, if you go back, there was a printing of the Constitution in 1934, after they repealed Prohibition. And even back then, they're talking about, yeah, you know, there never was any promulgation of the first 10 amendments, and you know, we don't have any information about Connecticut, Georgia, or Massachusetts. So once I found that, I was like, geez, you know, Schwartz is wrong. I believed he was right for years. What am I, an idiot? Apparently so. I drink the Kool-Aid. So what did I do? I went back into the archives of Connecticut, Kentucky, and Georgia to determine whether or not, by any weird quirk of history, that the legislatures had in fact affirmatively ratified Article the First, or any of the amendments, and just never got around to reporting it. Now before I do that, let me explain the context of the Prohibition case, because this is very significant. In a case called Dillon versus Gloss, in the mid-30s, in the early 20s, when they first enacted Prohibition, the 19th Amendment said, a year from the day that it's ratified, it's illegal to sell, dispense, consume, blah, 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 alcohol. Okay? A guy by the name of Gloss was a bootlegger. And he got caught. And he said, wait a second, the threshold state at that point had ratified like on one date. And he'd been caught a year after, between the time when the state legislature had ratified and when they actually got around to preparing a resolution. So the question in that case is, when did the amendment become operative? And the Supreme Court, not making law, but just reading what the Constitution said, no, it's ratified, it's law when ratified in this federal constitutional lawmaking process. So we already know who is on record and what is on record with regard to what amendments have been ratified. But before I show you something, the next thing, 100 years in, we have the centennial celebration of the Constitution in this country, and it's kind of a big event. Just like the bicentennial was a big event. And so there's all these commissions, and everyone starts studying the Constitution, and they're all excited about it. So the Department of State decides for the first time to make public information about the ratifications dealing with the Constitution. So they issue what starts out as a 2-volume set in 1894, which is expanded to 3 volumes in 1904, and then volumes 4 and 5 in 1905. The key to this story is volume 2, issued in 1894, of which I'm going to show you. 100 years in, before the Supreme Court used the 14th Amendment to even make the Bill of Rights applicable to the states, which didn't occur until the 20s, they list all the ratifications that were on record as having been received by the President and Congress. And I will save you time to say that what is in this book matches what Jefferson printed in that pamphlet and sent to the states. But what is in this book also is a note, not a declaration by a member. This is essentially a note by some editor that's an employee of the Department of State in 1894. And at the end of this, he says on page 390, which I will pass around to you, so you can see for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Because when you tell people this story, they're like, oh, that's another Obama birth certificate thing. That's a lot of hooey, not true, don't believe it. Don't listen to them. Listen to your own eyes, okay? On page 390 of this rather rare book, because again, in a country at the time where they had about 120 million people at that time, they printed a whopping 7,000 copies. So even today, this is not an easy book to find. Okay. But this also happens to be an accurate reprint. And let me preface this by saying, I didn't rely upon this. I went to the National Archives with my research privileges, which are not that easy to get. They don't give them to everyone, at least to look at the stuff I do. And I have, which I didn't bring here tonight because it's very hard to read, I have digitized copies of the handwritten ratifications from every state. So when I tell you that this is accurate, I went to the source every time. Because the one thing that you'll learn about me is if I say something is true, it's not because I'm arrogant. I don't go on record unless I'm sure. Not 95% sure, 100% sure. Now, let me read you this footnote written by some clerk in 1894. After talking about the ratifications on record, it says, note, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution proposed to the legislatures of the several states by the first Congress, September 25, 1789, were ratified by 11 states. That's true, ratified and reported. And the facts of the ratification were communicated to Congress by the President as follows. Maryland, January, so the states took action, they mailed it to the President, he mailed it to the Congress, he sent it next room over at the time, and gave it to the Senate, the House, and to the Secretary of State. And Maryland, January 25, 1790, New Hampshire, February 15, 1790, Delaware, blah, 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 okay? And then it ends with this sentence. This is 125 years ago. There is no evidence of the ratification of these amendments by Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Georgia. Now, I'm going to ask you to look at the date on this book. And what date is this, sir? What date was that published by the Department of State? The bottom. Right there.
1894.
1894. And what does this say? What did the Department of State know in 1894? Read that last sentence, please.
There is no evidence of ratification of these amendments by Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Georgia.
Pass that around, please. This is a little heavy. And the story's getting heavier. Now, one would have thought, just like with Professor Schwartz's reference to a 1963 magazine, that you'd want to see what was enclosed in the letter, one would have thought, like, 100 years in, geez, we have no evidence or information from Georgia, Connecticut, or Massachusetts. Now, you would have thought that someone would have said, gee, did anything take place in Connecticut, Georgia, or Massachusetts? No one checked. Now, in all fairness, in 1894, we didn't even really have telephones, we had telegraphs. You'd have to get on a horseback. Cars were still distant in the future. And communication was not that simple. So I'm not faulting people, but I'm saying, like, you would have thought they would have been curious. No one checked. And they left it alone, okay? And no one even thought about Kentucky. I'll tell you about Kentucky. Kentucky was the 14th state in the Union. Not an advocate for the Kentucky Consumer Affairs Division, but Kentucky was approved for admission as a state in February 1791, approximately the same time that Vermont was approved for admission as a state. However, Vermont was approved for admission as a state effective March 4th, 1791, meaning the day the next Congress started. And for whatever reason, Kentucky, which was known as the District of Kentucky, formerly part of, well, at the time still part of Virginia, had to wait for whatever reason until June 1st, 1791.